And then he told me, go ahead and shove the handle down into the muck to see how deep it is. And I just kept shoving that ore down there until the thing disappeared in the water. I could not believe how deep it was. And he said, you don't want to get out of your boat in this water, or God help you. And so, yeah, it's just like
are you trying to say your feet would get stuck in the bottom?
I had a hard time pulling that ore out of the water, much less if your feet were planted in it. So, yeah, I could see somebody drowning out there very quickly if somebody else wasn't around and you decided to step into that muck. So you would not get out of it.
Right.
Kyle.
I also have usage as a family when I was little, which is, I don't know, 10 years ago. I'm very young. I have family here, cousin Aaron and her family, and we also used to fish here and do things like that. Haven't really been doing that lately, but yeah, tech stuff.
You did a little research on the lake, did you? Is there anything in particular that came up that you were really interested in?
Nothing that can come to mind currently.
Well, you were talking about grass carp earlier.
Yeah, there is grass carp, yeah.
Like 83,000 or 80-some thousand grass carp in the lake. Well, we have some people here to share some great information. One of the people that I want to invite to our broadcast desk, if you would, is Commissioner Weber. So Dennis, if you would come up and join us here at the desk. And then a few different things I'd love to have you comment on just briefly is you've been in, I know you've taken a special interest in Silver Lake out here. So if you want to start by sharing a little bit of that, and then you've, as you mentioned a short time ago before we launched the show, that you've had to become a little bit of a landfill expert as well, and you've made some trips out to various landfills in Roosevelt and recently to Coffin Butte. So just share a little bit of that.
Sure. Well, it sounds like it's a little bit of old home week. We all, those of us who grew up in this area, always recognize Silver Lake for the asset it is, a great place to visit and fish and to boat, and we remember the Bass Championships. The Daily News used to always cover the contests that were held on a pretty regular basis. And as we were growing up, the other side comment almost always was, boy, the lake sure seems to be changing. It's getting shallower. And in fact, that is part of the natural life cycle of natural lakes. So you mentioned the origin of the lake. The lake was created not by glaciers, which is typical of a lot of lakes around here, but by a mud flow from, guess what? Mount St. Helens.
Right.
Plugged up the creeks, and they backed up to form the Silver Lake. So a few years back, to try to stabilize the level of the lake, one of the strategies was to build a dam across it. And there's a Silver Lake flood control district that funds that dam, and it's made up of some of the folks who live right on the lake and paying into taxes every year. And as a commissioner, we get an annual report from the engineer that they hire to inspect that dam to make sure it's in working order. So we are very much aware of the changing nature of the lake and the efforts to try to kind of reverse that flow. Now, having said all that, I grew up in Longview, and I was reminded of the old Lake Sacagawea a few weeks ago when some friends of mine invited me to go on a boat ride out here in Silver Lake, and I noticed the thick, very thick brown algae that is just transforming this lake. You can't see your hand if you stick your hand in the water down to your elbow.
Now they said
your
years
fingertips
ago you actually
disappear.
could.
Sure, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the lakes will do that. So there was an interesting comment that was made by the folks from Republic who have been examining our landfill in case we decide to choose them to negotiate. And one of the things that they mentioned to me that caught my attention was that the amount of leachate that is being collected at the landfill is about 3 times what their experience is with a similar landfill. And there's one, the one that gets all the attention is in Roosevelt, which is on the other side of the mountains. It's dry. That part of it is all very good and very huge, and it's done very well. There was virtually no odor, and they were producing natural gas with the methane. But I wanted to go see one on this side of the mountains with a similar climate, and so I went last week, I think, down to Coffin Butte, which is near Corvallis, and about the same amount of volume of refuse, and they only have about a third of the leachate. So the question is, where's that volume coming from for our leachate operation? And well, there aren't too many sources of water.
Right.
The rain makes it ample. So there's too much rain. It seems to me, too much rain going into the leachate system. We need to be converting that to the stormwater system, which gets treated. Water quality from Sucker Creek, it meets all the quality tests. So that part of it is working. It's just volume. What we learned with Lake Sextant Stream through to clear out, the decayed vegetation and just keep fresh water coming in. And if you're diverting the rainwater from Sucker Creek's watershed, there's a problem.
Correct.
And unanticipated, and it's just one of those things. So we're looking into ways. It doesn't matter who's going to be running the landfill. To me, they need to make sure if there's a possibility of diverting more rainwater back into Silver Lake, we ought to be pursuing that.
Now, I understand we have around 80-some acres in developed landfill area here in headquarters, and around 100 acres roughly in Coffin Butte, where you just recently traveled. And the difference for our viewers, that they clearly understand, the difference in leachate production out of the two locations is roughly 24 million gallons out of Coffin Butte, and somewhere in the mid 75, 76 million
about
gallons.
3 times more.
About 3 times more here. So with a slightly lower volume of total area in landfill, we are producing 3 times that. And there's definitely some solutions to it.
It's actually even more dramatic than that, because well over half of the refuse that comes into the headquarters landfill is industrial waste. So there's not a whole, that's ash, so there's not a whole lot of moisture content. And their operations down at Coffin Butte is almost completely municipal solid waste, which of course is just, it's got a lot of water in it. It's just the nature of garbage. So the contrast is pretty amazing. We need to do the studying. We don't know exactly the volume. I mean, that pipeline is only about this big, so how much water does that really represent? But it bears looking into, and I think we owe it to the people in this region to get an answer and see if there's something we can do to increase the flow of fresh water in Silver Lake. We ought to be doing that. That's not the only answer for Silver Lake. I'm really excited about the state allowing the water levels to drop in about a month. When does that go? In September. And we'll get a chance to go in there, do some water testing continued testing of the soils at the bottom, and see how long the natural processes take to refill that lake. And it all goes towards the data collection that the state needs to authorize more extensive renovations. And so, what's really frustrating, when I first came on the council, on the commission, the local committee was doing collection, water sampling, testing, keeping track of the data, and they had identified hot spots and other places that were just fine, and but it was all done by volunteers. And so the state said, not good enough. We've got to do it professionally. They gave us some money. We actually hired staff to be the professional, and then she worked with the volunteers to collect the samples, and voila, they'll tell you that the data confirms what they had been collecting 6 years ago. But
I have a question for you.
DOE has more information, and they've approved another couple of years of funding for continued water testing as we move towards a more dramatic solution. And of course, being from Longview, we manage our lakes, so I'm all enthusiastic about what we can do to get rid of the muck at the bottom that you described pretty well. And of course, the challenge is, where do you put the dredge spoils? And to what extent will the state allow us to sacrifice wetlands in order to fill with the dredge spoils? But
so one of the questions I have, and I don't know if this story was true or not, but apparently there was a private operator at one time that made an offer to come and dredge the lake, because apparently what's at the bottom of the lake is fantastic fertilizer.
Could be, yeah, would make sense.
I heard that offer had been made at one point to do it, and I know there's been other discussion, state solutions or whatever. Are there any viable solutions that you're aware of as far as dredging or cleaning the lake here?
I'm all for a dredging scheme. The last group that I want to speak on behalf of is this Washington State Department of Ecology. Mm-hmm. Who knows what kind of questions they'll put in our way, but we're taking the steps that they've asked us to take, documenting with a scientific report approach on what the water quality is, and from that they may be supportive of some kind of dredging. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I'd also heard some pioneer families absolutely swear that there are some peat bogs that could be harvested and sold as down at the bottom of the lake. That would be fantastic if that proved to be true. Sure.
Well, hey, Kyle, why don't we turn on microphone and camera over here? We have Steve and Ryan, Steve Gilmore and Ryan Lawler, who have joined us from Republic Services. You guys are going to have to slide a little closer there. Maybe you don't like each other that much. I don't know. Okay, so go ahead and turn their microphone on and camera on over there. And you heard what Dennis has had to share with regard to watershed, and I'm kind of curious what some of your thoughts are. You guys have seen our headquarters landfill. You've had, of course, your organization is the one running the landfill down in Coffin Butte. I'm really curious what some of your thoughts are and feedback or recommendations you'd be making relative to the landfill here.
Okay, you want to start?
Sure. So every landfill that we operate, we have a set of standards and absolutes that we operate from. So in terms of leachate generation, in terms of odor, all those things are parts of our absolutes and standards. And if we had a landfill anywhere in our system that was generating 74 million gallons of leachate, that would be a problem. That would not be accepted anywhere within our organization. So we have instituted some technologies and some strategies at Coffin Butte to minimize the amount of leachate generated at that landfill. So I think, as you've mentioned, Kevin, and Commissioner Weber has mentioned, the fact that we generate a substantially less leachate than what's generated here. And a lot of that has to do with operational efficiency, but the water is also problematic on a variety of different levels. It's not just about the leachate, but it's also about the structural integrity of the landfill itself. The amount of water going through that landfill actually jeopardizes the structural integrity of the landfill and actually could create much more problems down the road than just the water generation or the water loss to the watershed. I mean, this could potentially be really negative in terms of the actual structural integrity, which could create, bigger and more problematic issues surrounding, if the liner system were to fail or something else. Those are real serious issues that we take very seriously.
Are there other issues besides the liner itself that could be potentially compromised by excessive amount of leachate? Because I'm familiar at least with a couple of the downfalls of allowing too much water. First of all, leachate is not a good thing. Producing too much of it and any strategies that you could deploy to reduce leachate would be a good thing. So that in and of itself is one problem. The other thing, though, is when you're allowing that volume of water to go through the landfill, as Commissioner Weber pointed out here earlier, is that you're also losing that freshwater opportunity for the lake behind us. And
absolutely. I mean,
so could you comment a little bit more on what specifically are the structural related issues or concerns that represents?
So the structural issues are really predominantly about the engineering of the gas collection system, the liner, anything that we have to put in the landfill. That water actually has negative impacts surrounding those operations, and actually too much water actually takes up density as well. Some materials will actually expand with water, which then creates some unique challenges from a density standpoint, and you're losing airspace when that happens. I'll let Ryan speak to the finances of some of these mitigation things, but they're in the millions and millions of dollars in terms of mitigating the water from the landfill.
So maybe before I get into the details, maybe some high-level financial aspects of kind of our approach to mitigating leachate, I think maybe for those here and for those listening online, just to define what we're talking about with regards to leachate, it's effectively garbage water. So it's all the rain that seeps into the face of the landfill. Right now, that water is going all the way to the bottom, the pipeline that goes 16 miles down to the water treatment facility there in Longview. The reason why the landfill is generating much leachate today effectively is how the landfill is covering the garbage on a daily basis. They're using what we call auto shredder residue, which effectively is, you know, materials from cars that are shredded, layered on top of the garbage every night. You know, it's nice, it's a good use of cover. It doesn't really help keep a lot of that water out, and as a result you get lots of that leachate that goes down to Longview. I think what we do in Coffin Butte and what we do in a handful of our other landfills that experience a lot of moisture, like we do here in Cowlitz, we put pretty heavy-duty tarps on top of the landfill. We refer to this as EPDM material, and to Steve's point, just on the financial aspects of this stuff runs $75,000 to $90,000 per acre. Okay, there's roughly 300 or so acres up there to my right that we'd be putting this stuff on over the course of the life of the landfill. So you do that math, you know, let's just call $30 million of tarp that we would be investing in to help mitigate that garbage water. And as Steve referred to earlier, which would help create more stormwater, improve the watershed, which would likely benefit the lake here that we're staring at today.
And there's also some, so that material that Ryan is discussing is more for intermediate cover. So those are areas that you're not going to revisit for a good period of time. That material has 100% rate in terms of water shedding off of it. So once you put that down, no water will get into the liner system. But there's also some additional strategies regarding the auto shred and other things. Auto shred is actually almost acts like a sponge. So once the water goes through, it gets wet and it actually expands, which in turn sucks in more water into the landfill. So we would use soils and other things for alternative daily cover, as well as some other covering type materials that would actually limit the amount of water that's going through the landfill. And like I said, it goes back to the structural integrity. It's not only the right thing to do from the environmental standpoint, but it really is just the right thing to do for the landfill.
Mm-hmm. Very good. We have a member of the Silver Lake Water Advisory Committee who is here in our audience. Would you like to join us here at the desk for just a moment?
Okay.
Okay, switch our camera view back over here, Kyle. So if you would just introduce yourself to our audience and explain your role a little bit with the advisory committee here at Silver Lake.
Okay, my name is Dell Gilkerson. My family has owned a piece of property here on the lake for 55 years. Mm-hmm. I have lived in there as my permanent residence for the last 45 years.
So you got a little history in this lake.
I do.
Yes.
I do. I've seen it, and it's worse than I've ever seen it before. But anyway, the Silver Lake Advisory Committee, well, I got on it when we had a very bad algae bloom back in 2013. And I don't know if your viewers can see it, but that's what it looked like in 2013.
How's that
and
look?
that woke everybody up.
Go put that in front of the camera.
Okay.
It woke everybody up. And we talked with the flood control district, who maintains the outlet structure, and the county commissioners, and they gave money for us to test water quality at the lake. Mm-hmm. We did that for 2 years. We were trained by Washington State Fish and Wildlife, mm-hmm. and then we took over, and all volunteer work. You know, we paid for our own gas. We drove the samples to the lab, that kind of thing. I grafted this things. We got advice from Washington State Ecology, and what we found was that phosphorus is our main culprit in this lake. Mm-hmm. Actually, is phosphorus and nitrogen are the two main ones. We don't have a nitrogen problem. It's phosphorus, and it's like 3 times the acceptable level that we should have in this lake. Now, where is that phosphorus coming from? One thought is that right now we're down 12 inches from the top of the weir. Water's not going over the weir. Water has not gone over the weir for the last 12 inches. So every summer, that lake is evaporating, and the concentration of the stuff suspended in the water is concentrating. It's increasing. So that's where our problem is. And the idea about increasing the flow out of Sucker Creek, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
What kind of difference do you think, because we're talking about the difference between the Coffin Butte landfill that's down in Corvallis, their leachate production is around 24 million. Here is around 76 million. We could potentially have 50 million additional gallons of water runoff that could be available for the lake. What kind of difference do you think that'd make based on what you just described?
Well, I think it would make a difference, but we would still have the evaporation problem.
Correct.
Sucker Creek now does have less phosphorus in it than the lake itself, but Sucker Creek is above that limit of 0.02. So it can be contributing to the problem here. If the increased water coming from Sucker Creek has low phosphorus, then it would be definitely a good idea.
I have a question for Steve and Ryan then. Curious, like, what the water quality is that comes off of the, that shed off a properly covered landfill. Can you comment on what the actual water quality is?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's basically the rain itself, whatever the content of the rain is, it hits the material. Who knows what's in the ground there, but it basically just sheds off that water directly right into the ground where it can actually absorb appropriately and correctly and goes into the ground.
So essentially, the water that is shed off of a proper cover, off the landfill, is essentially the same water quality as direct rainfall into the lake, or very close to it.
Yeah, very close.
Okay.
So I have a question. Has the water been tested? What kind of tests are you getting, and how often do you do those tests?
So generally, in most of our landfills, we actually have a variety of wells that we test the water in and around. We also have at Roosevelt, as well as Coffin Butte, we have a full-time environmental manager, as well as generally 1 or 2 full-time environmental technicians, where all they do is check air quality as well as water quality, and make sure that the gas collection system is collecting gas appropriately, that our leachate system is capturing the leachate correctly. So we actually have generally 2 to 3 times full-time staff members at each and every landfill that's all they focus in on. Including, like at Roosevelt, we actually have native for it. We actually have not native, to see if any insects were coming from the west side that could potentially impact agriculture in central Washington. So to answer your question, each landfill has a variety of different ways that we test the water quality as well as the air quality.
Sounds good.
Very good. Do you have any other questions for him?
Yeah, how do you pay for all that? And if somebody bought our landfill, would our garbage rates go up?
Well, that's an easy question. So Ryan, do you want to tackle that one, or do you want me to tackle that one?
You start, and
okay.
I can layer on as needed.
So the challenge that you have right now is that the in-county volume, the 300,000 tons of in-county municipal solid waste as well as industrial waste, is actually paying a much higher rate than out-of-county waste. So your waste streams that are coming in from out-of-county are actually at a much lower rate, almost a $4 delta if you include both, if you include the industrial and MSW. On specifically MSW, your cost is about $25.33 per ton. There is waste streams that are coming into Cowlitz right now that are only charging $20 a ton. So, there's an issue here. We always have a most favorable rate for in-county volume. Coffin Butte, which is in Corvallis, Benton County, they actually have a much lower rate than the volume that's coming in from other parts of the state of Oregon.
So just capture what Steve is explaining, that right now people from outside the county that are shipping trash here are actually getting the best rates, and people in Cowlitz County are the ones paying the highest rate for trash garbage disposal in the landfill. That's what it is currently.
Right.
Yeah.
What he's explaining is that
we aren't selling. The selling of the landfill is not on the table.
Yeah,
that is not an option.
That's good to mention. That is that What the county is actually currently looking at would be a public-private partnership, not a sale of the landfill. And people, I hear many people talk about, you know, is the county selling the landfill? And a sale of the landfill is actually completely off the table. So all they're looking at is a public-private partnership, which the the county has several of right now. Like the partnership they have with Waste Control is a public-private partnership. So that's essentially what we're talking about here, is a partnership, not a sale of the landfill. But
yeah.
to just go to Steve's point, to make sure that you understand what he's saying, is that, and I found this to be really interesting, because they have several hundred landfills that they're running, and the host county, the residents in the host county, have had the best rates in all of those 294 experiences. And here in Cowlitz County, we have the flip of that. So essentially what Republic Services is saying is that with them managing the landfill, Cowlitz County will have the best rates, and people outside the county get to pay the higher rates coming in. And that's really the way it should be. I don't think Cowlitz citizens should be subsidizing trash for outside the county people.
To address your first specific question, we are committed to keeping rates low for citizens here in the county. And just to echo Kevin's point, you know, there's limited life on these landfills. You know, this effectively is the crown jewel of the county. A lot of remaining airspace here, and we think that the county can be managing it better by being more mindful of the type of material that's coming in from outside of Cowlitz County and at the price that it's coming in at. Effectively subsidizing the county as a resident, paying higher rates to dispose garbage in your landfill than folks coming down from King County, from Oregon. We think that we can be doing a little bit smarter to protect the interest and the asset that you have here in the county.
And the other issue that you have here is the waste stream that currently is coming into the landfill is eating up airspace at an incredibly fast rate. As an example, C&D, which is construction and demolition debris, is actually coming in about 12% of your waste stream. Right now to headquarters is actually C&D. That material is hard to compact, it doesn't decompose, it doesn't settle. So basically that material is taking up airspace that could be used for municipal solid waste, which is actually much more of a valuable waste stream, which also settles much more effectively and also decomposes. So generally what if you think about municipal solid waste, you generally get about 35% of the airspace